I mean, in America, there's that gender divide, but it's, for the most part, nobody actually runs against men or women. There, they really were running against it. I mean, that was very unique. And the
Yeah.
fertility rate in South Korea is the lowest in the industrialized world. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary in terms.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 252, and I've brought back after too long an absence Mr. Doug Bandow of the Cato Institute. He is a author of at least author or co-author of about a dozen books. He's worked a lot in foreign policy and analysis and other things. And we're going to talk about what's been going on in Korea right now, specifically South Korea. There was the president recently declared martial law, and not to mention it's South Korea is the champion of baby busts right now. They have about a woman in South Korea on average has about 0.9 kids or 9/10 of a kid. So that's a very low number, and it's not really sustainable. And I guess what's really embarrassing is that's a lower rate than North Korea. But yeah. How are you, Doug?
Well, I'm doing okay. How are you?
Yeah, it's we're and we're also 8 days from Christmas. Hopefully I'll get this out before then, but I won't make any promises. But yeah, so we recently had this situation with the president of South Korea declaring martial law, but then it got overturned pretty quickly. So what's up with that? What's been going on with South Korea?
Well, the election, I mean, there the left and right hate each other probably to a greater degree than in the United States. It's an extraordinarily bitter political divide, and the elections tend to go back and forth, and they're often very close. President Yoon Suk Yeol won his election by about 0.8% back a couple of years ago. It was a very, very tight race. He was a prosecutor. He's not a typical politician, and it turns out very, very strongly right wing, very anti the left. And he has not done very well domestically. His popularity ratings before he declared martial law was 17%. So yes. He hasn't done very well. He's everybody in Washington loves him because he's very kind of hawkish in terms of North Korea. He's kind of loves America. He's helped reconcile with Japan, and he showed up here for a state dinner and sang kind of karaoke style American Pie. Everybody loved it. The problem is at home, of course, his support was not there. That he ended up very much in the doldrums. And he's one of the typically on the right, they view the left as all being commies and et cetera, et cetera. So he was concluding, the left was out to get him. They were voting down his budget, which made him mad. He was convinced that they were all kind of working in league with North Korea, et cetera. So a couple of weeks ago, he, out of the blue, declared martial law, apparently didn't mention it to the prime minister or anybody else in his cabinet except for the defense minister. And, I mean, you imagine you are a politician who have the support of 17% of the population, and you imagine you're going to be able to rule by declaring martial law. Well, it turns out, he sent 300 soldiers over to the National Assembly to kick legislators out, but they prevented them from coming in. They voted to repeal martial law, and he gave in. And now it's complete chaos because it was evident that this was crazy, that there was no public support for it. His justifications looked very political. I mean, North Koreans are nasty people, but they weren't doing anything. I mean, it's not as if they were rolling the tanks or anything. And it's kind of like here is you want to kind of denounce the other side. You denounce the left as being communists and traitors and whatnot.
Yes.
You denounce the right as being fascist and that and the other. So he had no public support for this. And he's since been impeached by the legislature. It now goes to the Constitutional Court to decide if they toss him out of office. He's been suspended. And frankly, you have complete chaos. The prime minister is acting president. The Constitutional Court has to decide if he goes out or not. If he goes out, they have a new election in 2 months. If he doesn't go out, then he's completely crippled because nobody takes him seriously anymore. I mean, after that, he was down to 13% approval rating. I mean, there's no support for him. The military has said they wouldn't obey him. Most of his appointees were offering their resignation. The opposition hates him. I mean, and all you could say is that this is a guy who completely misjudged his population. South Koreans lived under military dictatorships. The irony here is that there's a new movie out on the coup back basically in the 1980 by Chun Doo-won after the murder of Park Chung-hee, who was the long-running military dictator. I watched it actually about a month ago on an airplane, and it was actually a pretty good film. It kind of helped explain how Chun Doo-won, with about 3,000 soldiers, managed to stage a coup, become president, and rule the place for 8 years. So this, I mean, the South Koreans revolted against that. Students protested it. I mean, that was a military that shot people down. They don't like military rule. I mean, they went through that. And he imagined, I guess, that he would just declare this and everybody would say, okay. It turns out he was going to arrest the chairman of his own party because, well, the guy was doing politics, and you're not supposed to do politics under martial law. It'd be extraordinary. So the betting is that he will be thrown out by the Constitutional Court and that the progressives will take the presidency in a new election. But their preferred candidate, who lost the election, the very close election to Yoon, a couple of years ago, is under indictment, and these charges could prevent him from running. So we don't even know who might run for president. And now, of course, now Trump's about to take over, and basically South Korea has no government, effectively.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a complete mess.
Doug, I wonder, could he have maybe just had, Hamas bomb a concert, and then maybe that would have raised his approval ratings, or, but I don't know if Hamas would care, but maybe he could have paid them off. But anyway, yeah, that's, I don't know that much about, what's happened. We had, effectively, Korea was one colony of Japan before World War II, and then independent after, World War II, divided initially at the 38th parallel latitude, north latitude. And then the North invades the South in 1950. We have the war, and then not quite the same, but we have a boundary line roughly the same place. So it's a little more crooked where the 38th parallel was. And ever since then, the two Koreas have went their separate ways. The North Korea was a communist dictatorship, and the South Korea has been characterized by many different types of government, I guess, since then, right?
Well, generally right-wing authoritarian until, you get to 1987 with the first real free election, which elected a former general, which is probably necessary because it kind of pacified the military. The next election brought to power a dissident. He was succeeded by an even more radical dissident. I mean, you really had free elections at that point, and you had transitions of power. But until the late 1980s, this was a military dictatorship.
Yes. And of course, 1988, was when they hosted the Olympics, and that kind of put South Korea on the world stage. And, South Korea has actually, done I don't know when they started doing very well, but they've done very well. It's a very high tech country. Maybe I've heard, it's maybe one of the places that's easiest in the world just to get on the internet. It's pretty densely populated, and
they're in the top 10 economic. Yeah. I mean, they've done extraordinarily well.
I mean, it's Samsung and Hyundai and some of these other companies. I mean, it's really, it's probably advanced since since the end of World War II, it's probably advanced as much as any country has, I imagine.
It's also it has a very vibrant democracy. I mean, people there take it seriously, and they go out and they protest, and there was a lot of, protesters turned out and said, "We want this guy impeached. We want him out." And it took a little effort because his party, you need 2/3 of the legislature. His party had slightly more than 2/3, but eventually a dozen of his own party's members voted to impeach him, and so now he holds no power, and he waits. their system, they don't have a Senate. Instead, it's the Constitutional Court that then decides on impeachment.
Okay.
But it's an extraordinary misjudgment on his part, because again, this is, if you look at the last 30 years, you recognize, I mean, these people have a vibrant democracy.
Yeah.
The notion after multiple free elections, going back, I mean, it goes back and forth between the parties, that people would just accept that he's now a military dictator. I mean, the idea was there's no more politics, nobody can say anything, parties can't operate. The idea that they would accept that from him, with his explanations, made no sense. I mean, again, it's not as if you're looking and saying, oh, the North is massing troops on the border, threatening to invade. No, they weren't doing anything. And then he's complaining because, the opposition, well, they voted down his budget. Oh my God, look at America. I mean, let's have martial law. They won't vote for the budget. People look at this and say, you're doing what? And it was a complete fiasco. He literally destroyed his political career, in 6 hours. At which point he revoked the martial law declaration. So within 6 hours, he had completely destroyed his career and achieved nothing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Doug, what? We don't have that many countries that have both a president and a prime minister. What's the difference there?
Well, if France does this, there's a strong president who typically runs foreign policy pretty strongly, but turns over the day-to-day administration of the government to a prime minister and others who he appoints. In the United States, I mean, the president is president and prime minister. There, what they say is, we're going to separate that. The president, will be, of course, the head of state, but, and will kind of make choices in terms of government, but there will be, in especially domestic policy, that authority for the most part is devolved. You can change the prime minister if you want, but in terms of day-to-day governance, you don't go to the president. He's not the one who meets with cabinet members. Cabinet members typically go to the prime minister. So you choose the prime minister, you decide to okay other ministers, but then you leave that to them. So South Korea, France are a couple of those systems where they do have a president, but in practice, it's the prime minister who makes a decision. But these aren't parliamentary systems. I mean, and that's the difference. In Britain, you don't have a president. The Queen or the King, is the head of government, head of state. So the American president goes over, they have dinner with the Queen. Okay. But then the actual government is run by the prime minister, who's responsible to the parliament. The parliament in South Korea, like that in France, is elected separately. And it makes choices. So you can have the government run by whoever, and the parliament can be on the opposite side, kind of like in America. So they run into the same situation where the government may not have a parliamentary control. And that's been the case in South Korea, where the opposition party won a big victory in the legislature. Even though Yoon was president, he controls the apparatus of power. But wherever he needs legislative approval, the opposition is in control.
Yeah. Didn't South Korea also have a prime minister or a president commit suicide a few years ago? Was that in South
Korea? It was a former president.
Yeah.
Moon Hyun. I mean, no Moo Hyun. No, he was accused of corruption. Yeah, no, I mean, he was one of the progressives, and he was accused of corruption afterwards. And he was out for a walk with his security detail, and basically he took a run, and off the cliff he went. Yes. No, I mean, actually, most of the presidents have gone to jail.
Yeah.
President Moon, the predecessor of the current guy, has not. But his predecessor, President Park, who was the daughter of the dictator who was murdered, she went to jail. Her conservative predecessor, he went to jail. His predecessor was the guy who committed suicide. His predecessor was Kim Dae-jung, whose kids were accused of, and I think convicted of, corruption. Now, his predecessor was another progressive who did not go to jail. His predecessor was the military guy who got elected. He did go to jail. And his predecessor was the dictator who actually also went to jail. So we joke that in South Korea, you elect the president and they're probably going to end up in jail. I mean, a majority of them have.
So this is an East Asian version of a banana republic, Doug? I mean, that's what it sounds like. I mean,
look, the way the government, the presidents tend to operate, it sounds that way. But of course, South Korea is a major economy. It's in the top 10. It's very sophisticated. I mean, it is it is a vibrant democracy in the sense that they actually have free elections. Banana republics typically don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once they moved out of the military dictatorship, people took their democracy seriously, and to the good. The opposition wins; they hand over power. I mean, this is not a place where, again, banana republics. Oh, good
Yeah.
luck getting control. I've now declared I'm the winner, even if the votes went the other way. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, there's a 0.8% difference between Yoon, the guy who was just impeached, and Lee, who was his opposition.
Yeah.
And I mean, they had the election decided on election day or the next day, as opposed to America, where we're having recounts in states and all this kind of stuff back in 2020. I mean, so they've run it pretty efficiently. It's just quite, I mean, there has been corruption, and and it really is kind of a winner take all vicious politics. So it's a weird mix of industrialized state democracy plus, kind of, kind of crazy banana republic stuff thrown in.
Yeah, I can imagine too. If you've got a full-time security team with you, it's probably very hard to commit suicide. I would think, if you, I mean, how are you going to? You're not really, since you're always having somebody with you. I mean, you've got to. I know that's a crazy subject, but
I mean, one aspect, he was former, which means he had a smaller security detail.
Yeah.
No, and he was out on a walk on a mountain, basically.
Yeah.
And the point is, nobody's threatening him there. So I think the security personnel probably relaxed. I mean, he'd done the walks before. I mean, nobody was expecting he would sprint towards the edge and jump, which is kind of what he did.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's actually very tragic. I mean, it's not. I don't know if, in fact, he was corrupt. I mean, it's one of these things where, the accusations come freely from the other side. Both sides go after each other with hammer and tongs. They don't, I mean, again, the left and right there, the divisions are probably worse than in America. I mean, we've come, maybe our current standards have now reached South Korean standards, but for years the South Koreans were far worse than the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it's worse. I suppose, being a former prosecutor, he was probably one of these, tough on crime guys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And they do tend to be right wing. So, what does the right want and what does the left want? I mean, in South Korea, are the divides the same? Or, for example, it's also very much from what I hear, it's very divided by gender. Is it also divided, by Seoul and the small towns, or,
Well, there are regional divisions.
Yeah.
So I mean, so Seoul has its own character. You go down southeast, southwest. I mean, there's a famous town, Gwangju, which is always opposition, where Chun Doo-won, who was the military dictator, I mean, where they protested against him taking control, he sent in the military and they killed 1,000 or more people, demonstrators. That has always been in opposition. So that's always voted progressive. So the issue has always been kind of like here, can you turn out your base? So there are areas that are viewed as kind of the right wing. There are areas that are left wing. It's regional more than kind of urban, rural. That's always been, the left. I mean, their division on part is economics. Progressives tend to be left wing on economics. Anti-chaebol, anti the kind of monopoly, consortiums, more in favor of labor rights, etc. Right wing tend to be more, pro kind of corporate and whatnot. On foreign policy, the left tends to want to be nicer to North Korea. That I think there's a certain naivete, believing that if we're nice to the North Koreans, they'll be nice to us. The right wingers view the lefties as being communists and working with the North Koreans and selling out the country and whatever. You certainly had some of that under the George W. Bush administration, where if you didn't believe we should invade Iraq, then obviously you were a communist, you were pro-terrorist, you were pro-Saddam Hussein. They played the same game. They question your patriotism if you don't support the regime. So that left-right division in South Korea, in certain ways, mirrors what you might find in the U.S. It has its own regional dimensions, and it's extraordinarily virulent. I mean, it's amazing to watch and to listen to. I mean, they really hate each other.
Well, one thing, it's safe to say that the South Korea is very homogeneous, though, right? I mean, everybody there is probably, their parents lived in Korea, their grandparents lived in Korea, their great grandparents lived in Korea. Is that true? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's heavily ethnic Korean.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had a lot of actually, Koreans go to America. I mean,
Yeah.
the lady who cut my hair for many years, I mean, she married an American GI. I mean, we would talk South Korean politics, and she was on the right. Oh, she didn't like President Moon. My goodness. But it was not from my standpoint, it was fun because I could kind of talk to her. What does she think about this? What does she think about North Korea? And you're getting a perspective that is clearly powerful back in South Korea. But yeah, I mean, it's in many ways kind of like Japan. I mean, this is not a society that encourages immigration. A lot of homogeneity there. Nevertheless, you find ethnic Koreans around the world. So, Korea has a global presence. I mean, and that's been interesting. And it's always been open in the sense that with America there, a lot of contact with the United States, which is why you have, South Koreans who've gone to America. I mean, in Northern Virginia, where I live, there are Korean congregations of churches. And some of them do Korean language, some of them are in English. But it's very interesting. I mean, you have Koreatown, you have a Korean community. So there's a certain, I mean, people kind of stick together in a certain way, even here in America. Nevertheless, they're very much integrated into the larger American society. There it is, they're Korean. I mean, ethnicity is not the division between them. It's region, it's political belief, it's not ethnicity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, certainly. And I suppose as you said, the right wing probably tends to be much more pro-American, and South Korea is actually, and if you want to say America has an ally, they've supported us in just about every war we've been in, whether or not you agree with those wars. They've always sent troops. It's better.
Well, part of that is to ensure that we keep our troops there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was certainly the view with Vietnam. We used to have two army divisions there. Richard Nixon took one home. South Koreans were very nervous about that. They sent troops to South Vietnam. They figure that's one way to keep us there. I mean, look, both at this stage, over the years, if you were the oldest South Koreans remember America, they think of the Korean War, where the U.S. came in and saved them from communist domination. They tend to be very, very pro-American. Then the kind of the next generation or two grew up with military regimes that they perceive were backed by America, supported by America, accepted by America. So the next couple of generations tend to be more divided, with a certain number of them, hostile to the United States, viewing the U.S. as having helped support military regimes. Younger generation growing up in democracy, tend to be looking at the North, seeing the North that's nuclearized and other stuff. They tend to be then moving a bit more pro-American. So you see those generational divides depending upon the environment they grew up in and how America fit into that. So if you were protesting against a military dictatorship, which you perceived was supported by America, you weren't very happy with the Americans. But if you were, part of the group who were saved from being conquered by North Korea, you tended to be very pro-American.
Certainly, yes. Does the left right, have any divide over, say, relations with Japan and China? Because I know that I don't know if the Koreans have ever really forgiven the Japanese for some of the things they did, but
yeah, the progressives tend to be softer on China and harder on Japan. The right wingers tend to be the reverse.
yeah.
So Yoon and I think actually it makes sense. Yoon, has tried to have a more positive relationship with Japan, and quite frankly, they should. I mean, these are both democratic states. Both of them, to the extent if you should be worried about North Korea and China, both of them should be worried. They should work together. And I mean, there's a history there that's very ugly, and you can understand why they're upset.
Oh, yes.
Japan took over as a colony. They treated they treated the Koreans very badly. They wanted to change their names. They wanted to eradicate Korean culture. They wanted, and they basically turned, Koreans into, wartime laborers. They had the question of what were called the comfort women forced into prostitution. So there's a lot of history there of the imperial Japan that treated, the Koreans very badly. The problem is, of course, all those people, the people who came up with that and did that are all, for the most part, dead. So the question then is, can you move past that? And right wingers in Korea are more likely to want to move past that, in part because they are more anti-North Korea and more anti-China, in which case it makes sense to move towards Japan. Progressives, leftists are kind of the other way. They're not as hostile to both North Korea and China, so they retain a lot more animus towards Japan.
Yeah, yeah, and both countries have just advanced so much since the end of World War. Just wonder, Doug, before the end of World War II, when was the last time Korea was independent?
Korea was basically independent up to about 1890. Now,
Okay.
saying it was independent, it was still wasn't directly under the control of China, but I mean, it's one of those. These are places like Okinawa before it was taken over by Japan. Was actually independent, but typically had a relationship with China. I mean, basically, China had dominant influence in the kingdom of Korea, so it was an independent kingdom, but it's pretty much going to do kind of what China wants it to do, even though it's not directly run by China. That ended really in kind of 1890. I mean, that's the point the Japanese moved in. They defeated China in a war. Yeah, that's when how Taiwan was separated from China. The Japanese took it. What kind of in that period, they ended up essentially taking over Japan. They turned it into a colony. Originally, it was still nominally independent, but effectively run by Japan. Then Japan turned it into a colony in the early 1900s, and that's where they had direct rule and where they really tried to eradicate Korean culture, etc. And that's why the Koreans still remember all of that. Their relationship with China, it was much looser. The Chinese mattered, but the Chinese did not come in and try to run everything and kind of change the culture. And the Chinese never claimed that the Koreans were Chinese. Japan came in and basically said, now you're us, but of course you're inferiors. I mean, because you're not real Japanese, but you're kind of part of Japan, the Japanese empire now, so we're going to run things. That hostility still remains.
Yeah, yeah, it's forgotten. Japan. Yeah, Japan took those islands all the way down, and including Taiwan. They called it Formosa at the time.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it was a very much, and granted, most of what I know, or maybe it's not true, is what I remember from just watching all those episodes of MASH. But I also get the impression that Korea, for example, it gets as hot as Florida in the summer, and it gets as cold as Minnesota in the winter. Is that true?
Yeah, basically.
I mean,
in the winter, those winters are awful. I've been to into Shenyang, which is China. It's about 2 hours north of the Yalu in December. And I mean, and that's that's the kind of cold you get in Korea. It is really cold in December. July it's quite hot. So yeah, it's pretty radical both ways.
Yeah, what's their general attitude toward other countries like, say, Russia or Vietnam or England?
Uh, well, look, I mean, Russia's there
Yeah.
now. So at the moment, I mean, Russia, I mean, when Russia, kind of the communism, ended, Russia recognized South Korea and actually at that point had a greater economic relationship with the South than the North. I mean, today, Russia is turned to North Korea for arms, particularly artillery,
Yes.
ammunition. So that relationship is pretty close. Nevertheless, the Russians have tried not to break their relationship with the South. South Korea is the economic powerhouse. You want economic relationship, it's not North Korea, it's South Korea. So Russia has tried to maintain that relationship. South Korea gets a country like the UK, United Kingdom. South Koreans like them perfectly. I mean, they're happy to trade with them, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, South Korea is very much it's a Western-oriented, industrialized state that has good relationships with Europe. Yoon has shown up at NATO meetings. I mean, we've been trying to get our allies, both South Korea and Japan, kind of involved in certain ways in NATO, which I think in certain ways is kind of silly, but nevertheless, they get along fine. I mean, this is an industrialized democracy which fits pretty well with Europe. That everybody understands it has a unique relationship with China, and that's kind of the complicated one, where the South Koreans had a very good relationship with China until the Chinese, imposed sanctions because the South Koreans put in THAAD anti-missile, batteries, and then the view of China crashed. I mean, so these days, China is not highly thought of because of the way it's played some of the economic policies against the South. But the South has a very good relationship with most industrialized states, most democratic, and actually, I mean, they have embassies all over the world. They do a lot of construction work. They get along fine with the global South as well.
What do you think has held up North Korea as this? I mean, really, between them and Turkmenistan probably being the worst dictatorships in the world, what has kept that dictatorship alive for so long? I mean, they don't really, they don't have the high tech that South Korea has. They're not, shipping out the exports. Are they subsidized, or what keeps that dictatorship alive?
Well, this is basically a communist monarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've visited twice, and you actually see virtually no communist symbolism.
Yeah.
I mean, they use the hammer and sickle, but they add a brush for artists, intellectuals. So they have their own kind of symbolism. I mean, I saw virtually nothing. They don't have Marx up. They don't have Stalin. They don't have Mao. I mean, everything's about Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il. I mean, the grandfather and father of the current guy. Their pictures are everywhere, and they're the ones who are venerated. Well, I mean, it's very hard to organize against the regime. You have roughly 2 million people who live in Pyongyang. These are the elite. You have about 1 million people in the military. If you can keep those 3 million people fed, you probably keep control of the country. Most people live in rural areas. People who are viewed as unreliable live in the least desirable areas, the furthest from the capital. When you're starving, it's hard to organize against the regime. This is a true totalitarian state. It has labor camps, political crimes. You live in harsh conditions. If you transgress, traditionally, what they have done is they punish 3 generations. So if you do something bad, your parents, and your kids go to the labor camps. It's a very powerful disincentive for you to resist. They also have a system called the Sungbon system, where basically they separate people into categories. And you have the kind of loyalists, you have the kind of wavering classes, and you have the enemies. And that determines your access to goods, it determines where you live, it determines that sort of thing. If you're caught breaking the rules, I mean, you end up at a labor camp. I mean, it's a really nasty dictatorship. Yeah, I mean, Turkmenistan is another one. Eritrea has been called the North Korea of Africa. These are the bottom feeders. I mean, North Korea is one of the very worst places in terms of any kind of liberty.
Yeah, I know the generational thing. So that really also keeps probably even keeps people from trying to leave, because I suppose if you end up disappearing, your family gets punished if you sneak across the border and somehow get out.
Well, when it was happening a lot, I mean, prior to COVID, I mean, there was a lot of travel across the northern border. The challenge was the Chinese would send you back if they caught you. It was common enough that for the most part, I mean, if a relative disappeared, you probably wouldn't send the family to a labor camp, in part because you didn't kind of know what happened to them, as opposed to, I mean, if somebody's transgressed, you have them right there. It's much easier to say, oh, you did X, you insulted the great leader and whatever. These days, it's very hard to get away because the regime has tightened up border control very, very tightly. So people are pretty much locked in now as a prison. It's certainly it's a disincentive for athletes, disincentive for diplomats, disincentive for business. Those who travel abroad, for the most part, you can't take your family. Then I mean, then if you're especially your regime, kind of somebody highly valued by the regime, you flee under those circumstances. Your family's almost certainly going to pay a price.
Yeah, well, that was why Ayn Rand changed her name when she published her novels. She didn't want it to get back to her family.
That's right.
The whole, and that's one of the hallmarks of, unfortunately, a dictatorship is these family punishments, which are just, I think, an absolute but that's unfortunate though. Yeah, but and from what I hear, I don't know if people are just starving or the medical care. Yeah, you went twice. Wow. Not something I'd ever do, but I guess. And from what I've heard too, when you visit, you can only visit as part of a tour group.
No. The separate tourism from invitations by the regime.
Okay.
Tourism, you only go as part of groups.
Yeah.
Much more restricted. They decide what you can photograph, etc. I went at an invitation of the regime. I mean, my last time was 2017. My institute paid for everything. I pay air travel in, I pay for the hotel, I pay for the car, blah blah blah. It's all entirely on our dime. I had two handlers with me, but the point is, I had a lot more freedom. They have invited me in. They're trying to make the case on why we should have better relations.
Yeah.
So they treat it's a different. Tourists come in and they're basically just trying to milk them for cash. So so that one, and they certainly don't want a bunch of tourists running around. For me, I mean, it's just even though they would try to control things, it's much harder to say like you can't take photos of anything. I mean, well, that's not very much of a sales job. So for the most part, I could take photos of what I wanted. That kind of a thing that you go in under those circumstances, you have greater freedom. It's still restricted, but I mean, look, it's illuminating. I mean, it's just what you see, especially you have conversations, you see things. There's a lot of stuff you kind of you get a feeling for, even if nobody can actually say it. You come away thinking, oh, that's what happened. Now I got it, sort of thing.
So there's not a situation of this podcaster says really bad things about our country. Let's invite him in, and then once we get him here, we can arrest him and send him to the labor camps. There's nothing like that.
They do not do that. No, I mean, there's a whole, the situation with Otto Warmbier was a very tragic one. University of Virginia.
Yeah.
I mean, almost certainly. And what's interesting is the doctors who examined him when he came back, and the coroner after he died, found no evidence of torture. So, I mean, there simply was none.
Oh, wow.
No, I mean, there was none. Now, the question is what happened to him? He was in a tour group. I mean, it's very complex. I mean, I hate to get into too much detail. He was on a British tour group. It's a tour group that looked very irresponsible. What they did, they sold these trips as a drinking adventure, which, if you want to go drinking adventure, you don't go to North Korea. I mean,
This
is not Canada. This is not Denmark. No, you don't.
You don't want to get drunk in a country like that because you might do something stupid and you're not going home.
That's almost certainly what happened. And I mean, we don't know anything for sure, but the tour group encouraged people in the tour to go up. There's the hotel they stayed at. There was a floor that was the official political floor. Guests weren't supposed to go to. You couldn't get to the elevator. You had to use the stairs. Apparently, they encouraged people to go. The rumor that it was allegedly he stole a poster, right? Look, when I went there, I stole a towel from my hotel, which I proudly possess from the Corio Hotel. I mean, my reaction was that I wouldn't go to jail. I mean, they would simply it'd be embarrassing if they opened my luggage and found it. What I did is I simply, at that point, I was a runner. I ran my last day. I wrapped my towel around my wet jogging shorts so I could explain, oh, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. I have a friend who was involved in that. His comment was he stole a bunch of swag, as he put it. He left North Korea. They opened his luggage. They found it. He said they laughed and they charged him for it. What they hate is humiliation. Theft is not humiliation. Theft is you want the stuff. And it gave them an opportunity to charge for it. The rumor that circulated in the community at the tourist community was that he was shown taking a picture of himself peeing on a picture of the supreme leader. No one knows for sure if that's true. But that would explain what happened. I mean, that's like showing up at the Vatican and you're going to pee on the Virgin Mary. This doesn't go over well. And the other thing is, for North Koreans, Americans are of value only alive, not dead. So the question, the betting is, I mean, they had MRIs and stuff. Whatever happened around the time he was sentenced for the issue. That allergic reaction. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that they actually wanted this to happen. Look, it's an evil regime. That they kill lots of people, but I don't think they wanted to kill him. I mean, it's a great tragedy. We don't know what happened. There's a group that works there called Christian Friends of Korea. I talked to their head. She said they bring. I met them while I was in North Korea. They bring people over. They had an Australian doctor, Americans, and others. And this, of course, made them nervous. And she commented they investigated all the cases. And there are about almost 20 Americans over 20 years. And her comment was all of them who were arrested did something. Nothing that we would view as warranted arrest, right? You leave a Bible somewhere. But guess what? That's against their law. They get pissed off. But what they would usually do is they'd actually put you at some hotel and they try to get some fancy American to come and get some political out of it and get rid of you. So she came away from that and she said the North Korean response was, look, we know people make mistakes. We don't care about that. We get really pissed off if you humiliate us and violate our law.
Yeah, that's
so. As long as you know what you're doing, you're not going to get in trouble. I mean, the thing is, if you want to evangelize, you'll get in trouble. God bless you. You're courageous. I appreciate that. But if you show up and do that, the Americans who were treated worse were a couple who went over there with Bibles who wanted to evangelize. Like I said, I admire them, but you do that, things are not going to go well. So I like to see Americans go over. You're not going to get in trouble. Just be careful what you do. You'll see some interesting stuff.
Yeah. This show is not legal advice, but I probably wouldn't go either way. But so certainly, if
I have an adventuresome spirit. We went to Afghanistan twice. I've been to Syria, South Sudan, Haiti, and a lot of other places. So,
there's a lot of places that can be dangerous. It's I can see that. Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of countries, they'll it costs them money to put you in jail, but it doesn't cost that much money for them to put you on a plane and say go home.
And that's kind of what they did with Warm Bear. Is that they had a meeting with an American ambassador, and Warm Bear came up, and it appears they brought it up because they wanted to get rid of him. They realized he was declining. And the U.S. said, "Oh, we'd like to have him," and it was kind of like, "Thank you, here, take him. We'll get rid of him."
Yeah.
Because they understood if he died on their watch, it would really be a problem.
Yeah.
So I look at it as a tragedy. I mean, it should not have happened. This is an evil regime. All of this is very clear. But I don't think they go out of their way to kidnap Americans and whatnot. I mean, I think his case is a tragedy. We don't know the specifics. They treated him badly, but I don't think they actually wanted him to die.
Yeah, what do you think would happen? If let's say Americans decided to just pick up and leave.
Leave South Korea, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, look, I mean, South Korea has more than 50 times the GDP. It has twice the population.
Yeah.
Why on earth can't it defend itself? I mean, I get frustrated by this because, of course, this is a case all over the world. I mean, the Europeans remain helpless. Oh, my God, what should we do? I don't know. You think, well, maybe you should spend more on the military. Oh, my God, what should we do, right? I mean, we're supposed to defend everybody. We sell lots of weapons to the Saudis, but the Biden administration wants to protect them and have a treaty. And really? I mean, come on. And then, well, why are we defending South Korea? You'd have to give them time. I mean, I think that we should pull out troops. I've argued this for a long time. You don't do that tomorrow. What you do is you say, look, over the next 10 years, all the troops are coming home, and then we're going to change the treaty. We can cooperate, but we're not going to have a defense guarantee for you. This is up to you. You guys, are rich. You have enough people. Well, build out your military if you think that's necessary. You don't expect us to defend you. Come on. This is 70 years on. I mean, come on. After 70 years, can't you defend yourselves? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yes, because the war is at least technically not over. I mean, there was a ceasefire and that was it. A treaty has never been signed.
Yeah, that's right.
It's an
armistice. Yeah, they have.
There's the demilitarized zone. Do North Koreans ever try to cross that zone into South Korea?
Oh yeah. We've had a number of them. I mean,
what happens? I mean,
the other North Koreans try to shoot them. I mean, the last one who made it. He drove his Jeep into the zone until he ran into, obstacles that are put up to prevent you from actually driving across. Yeah. And then he ran for it. I think he was shot 4 or 5 times. He survived. And, the Allies got him and put him in the hospital. He survived. It's a long shot. I mean, because it's not easy to, they make it hard. It's not like you can just easily drive across and then you're there. The one place, and they don't allow the kind of unrestricted visits the way that we do on the South. We had the case where the American soldier ran across the North. Panmunjom has the one point where they have the 5 buildings, and there's nothing that prevents you from going across. I mean, it's just a line there. and he was in the group. I mean, I've gone there as a tourist, and you can literally step across the line. Kim Jong-un invited Trump to step across the line back when Trump was visiting South Korea, and he went up to Panmunjom, and he basically sent a note, to Kim Jong-un and said, "Hey, we should meet." So Kim showed up, and Kim invited him across the line. So technically, Trump has visited North Korea. I mean, that's a place where you've had Americans or others from the South could kind of run across. North Koreans don't allow kind of tourists to show up who can run across, to the South. For the North Koreans to go, they typically have to be military, and they have to get through obstacles and everything else, and they will get shot at. I mean, this guy miraculously survived.
Yeah, would it be possible to, go to the beach and take a rowboat or something like that? I mean, or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose in theory.
Well, you can't necessarily station troops out in the water.
Look, everything would depend on tides and everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, the both East and West. I mean, there are kind of technical boundaries. I mean, the problem is the North Koreans don't necessarily respect that. I mean, under the Johnson administration, they took the USS Pueblo, an American intelligence ship that apparently was operating in international waters. Well, the North Koreans shot it up and grabbed it and said it was in their waters. So, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, you imagine you have to get far enough out, and you have to kind of get down, and they would have to not notice you. And, my guess is that the beach close to the border is probably off limits. So, I mean, it's probably a military zone where, you'd have to have a military guy try to get a military boat or something. I don't know if anyone's ever tried that. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, it was just something that I thought of, but too.
There have been South Korean fishermen, who have kind of gotten out where the North Koreans have grabbed them and then announced they all wanted to defect to North Korea, and poor guys are stuck, kind of there almost certainly against their will.
I don't think there probably are any people trying to go from south to north, but who knows? Yeah. So where do you think this? So what do you think is going to happen with the current situation? I mean, I know, for example, also the divide. It's very much women are on the left and men are on the right. They have women have like 0.9 kids. I mean, what happens with that?
Yes, I mean they'll recognize this is. I mean, like in the U.S., I mean there is clearly a kind of a gender break, but I mean it's still. I mean there are a lot of women who vote right wing, a lot of men who vote left wing. It's just that this is one where, weirdly, the issue kind of feminism and playing to that, where the progressives are much more seen as a more pro-feminist party, the right wingers are seen much more as the hardline guy party, and it's and that's what Yoon won. And I mean, one of Yoon's and they had a gender ministry or something. Yoon promised to get rid of it. He did get rid of it. So he played to that. So this last election really did have. I mean, in America, there's that gender divide, but it's, for the most part, nobody actually runs against men or women. There, they really were running against it. I mean, that was very unique. The fertility rate in South Korea is the lowest in the industrialized world. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary in terms of it. I mean, women, I mean, clearly have a lot of influence there. I mean, the 2 presidents ago was a woman. I mean, so they've had a woman president before America's had a woman president. So women are in the National Assembly. Women hold political office. Women hold have businesses. But this is clearly the whole issue of gender and gender roles has become highly political.
Yes, it has. And often in America too, it's more single women who are voting on the left, but the married women are voting on the right. I don't know what the is it at. I've heard, for example, now there's more also more people in senior care than there are in daycare.
Well,
I mean, kids versus children.
I mean, this is occurring all over. I mean, this is Europe, this is Japan, this is China, this is South Korea. And frankly, it's America. I mean, the U.S. population continues to grow because of immigration. Our fertility rate is below replacement levels. That for the most part, the growth you have in population is Middle East and Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary how low the fertility rates are across the industrialized world. We're seeing shrinking populations everywhere. South Korea is an extreme example. I mean, it really is rock bottom.
Do you think maybe that's because the country's also gotten more tech? I mean, you often hear, that, as things that, you're older than I am, but when we started out as teenagers, if we wanted to meet girls, we had to go and, walk up to them and say, "Hi there. How you doing? I think you're cute. Let's go out," and now it's not that way anymore. I mean,
but the question remains is why have kids and why do so few people want to have kids today? I mean, part of that may be the question of professionalism, and it may be a bit tougher on women. I mean, even though they have achieved a lot, given a certain male orientation in Asia, that it may require more effort on their part to try to break through professionally. So that may make them less interested in having the kids. That sense of a history of gender roles, that they're kind of responding against that a bit more strongly. I don't know. I mean, I'm not aware of anything obviously why there should be a dramatic difference in South Korea, even more so than say Japan or more so than China, because both of those places are also shrinking populations. It's just that South Korea is radically more.
Yeah. Do you think South Korea is, a preview for what's going to happen to the rest of, Japan and America and the rest of what we'd call Western civilization?
Yeah. I mean, look,
Yeah.
I don't see any obvious reason why. I mean, it's Russia, it's Italy, it's Germany. I mean, it's all over.
Yeah.
The industrialized world, and kind of, is all going that way. I mean, wealthy countries all going that way. I don't know what turns it around. I don't see anything obvious that turns it around.
Yeah.
And again, we still have growth, say in Africa, in the Middle East, say, but the question, even there, it's slowing. I mean, there the fertility rates are dropping. It's simply they're still higher than replacement level. But typically wealthier societies that happens. It's a question of the preference for kids. I don't know. I don't see anything that people come up with pronatalist policies and offer subsidies, and you can tweak it a bit. I mean, a place like China, it's very expensive to raise kids. Apartments are expensive. Blah blah blah. But it's still. I think these decisions are very personal, and it's very hard to come up with policies to change them. People have a preference for more or less kids, and that typically doesn't change very much.
Maybe not, obviously not quite as rich as we are now, but I would certainly call, early America was a society that was wealthier than most of the world, and it produced a lot of kids. So
But that was the time. I mean, fertility rates were high around the world.
Of course there was no birth, and of course there was no, the pill didn't exist, and I don't know how much that was.
There's a part of it. I mean, certainly within. I mean, say, if you were kind of Jewish Christian, I mean, that heritage of be fruitful, multiply. And that was, and part of that I think was a time where, if especially if death rates were higher for babies, you have more of them because you want to make sure. And the question, how many do you have? And there I think it was a more clear gender role. I mean, men are you go and get the musket and you go out and hunt. Women stay home. So there were a lot of things that it's hard to compare today and then. And I think that what you see is what we recognize today is the higher wealth gets, people decide they want to do other things. And these social factors are different. I mean, there are still Irish Catholic families which might have a lot of kids, but that's less. You don't have as much of that. And you have even Irish Catholics today are probably less likely to have such high fertility rates.
Yeah, that is one change too. Up until World War II, it was not uncommon to lose a child. It really wasn't. And maybe you had more kids to at least make sure you had a few that lived to adulthood. But yeah, I just wonder, where do you think this goes, or how does this end? Because Doug, I've said it a million times on this show, but we saw the Berlin Wall fall. None of us thought we would still be fighting the communists now.
Look, I mean, humanity is very complex. I mean, it's in theory, one could imagine entire countries disappearing. Now, I have trouble imagining that's actually going to happen, but uh, what stops it? I don't know. I mean, there is a question of, I mean, immigration. What do you find instead? Certain countries empty out,
Yes.
and people decide they go somewhere else where they can be more productive, so they keep those societies alive. I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of been America. If I mean, you're in an African country that has a completely screwed up economy, you can't take care of your family.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Nigerians are incredibly productive. I mean, the country itself is a tragic mess. And we have, Nigerians in America. Well, they're very productive. So you can imagine maybe that will be the future, which is in some of these countries where they just can't politically get their act together. And what you will find is, despite today all the hostility, Donald Trump and others, to immigration, what we might find is that attitude changes because people start looking and saying, if we don't have more people coming, we shrink, we disappear. Let's let them
Yeah.
come.
Well, you would also, you would also think if you have a lower population, the costs of real estate would get cheaper. You'd have the same number of houses but less people.
Right.
You'd farmland, of course, you wouldn't need to grow as much food, but it's a, it's not a bad thing for the people to stick around, but it's a certainly it creates less economics, less, that I've noticed, I did visit Mongolia 5 years ago, and there's actually a lot of Koreans who go there, and Mongolia is a very sparse country. It's the same population as Utah, and it's 7 times the land area.
Yeah, I mean, half the population is in the capital, Ulaanbaatar.
Yeah.
They've long had a very positive relationship with both Koreas. I've been there 3
Yeah.
times for conferences on Korea. I mean, they actually have a good relationship with both North and South Korea. But you're right. I mean, you go out the moment you get outside of Ulaanbaatar into the steppes. I mean, there's virtually nobody. It's extraordinary how much the expanse of land, there versus a relatively small population.
Yeah, 3.5 million living in Ulaanbaatar, and I also remember absolutely horrible traffic city, worse than anything in America. And
I mean, it's pretty ugly. I mean, it's just
yeah,
frankly, it's not a very nice.
but there were cranes everywhere. But I saw a lot of Korean restaurants, and I just heard, they go to China, and the Chinese don't treat them well, so they go to Mongolia. Doug, I've also heard if they do end up deporting the Koreans, they usually send them to South Korea, not North Korea. So maybe that's what they want anyway. They really just want to, and they want to get deported to South Korea so they can.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah,
a lot of them.
I actually I don't know if you know a guy named Henry Song, but we actually protested outside the North Korean embassy, where it's actually illegal to have more than one person protest in Mongolia. But I protested. Yes, and I don't know if I should leave this on the tape, but anyway. But yeah, he's big on helping North Koreans get out. So
I'd love to get more of them out. I mean, look, it's a terrible totalitarian dictatorship. It's awful.
Yeah, and it's funny how one thing that's been funny of this, some of these North Koreans apparently are going and helping the Russians fight, and they're getting exposed to internet porn for the first time, and they're getting. I mean, what is this going to open up though? You have this really closed society, but you let these soldiers get on the internet. How's that going to impact the military? And it's unfortunate that, it happens to be porn, but I guess that's something.
Well, look, most of them have probably seen South Korean TV shows. Yeah. I mean, that's been very common. Now, the North has really tried to clamp down on that. And COVID, it kind of made it easier because they stopped many goods from coming into the country. So that's hard to smuggle. But I mean, it's been quite common. I mean, the regime has really cracked down on it. I mean, teenagers go to jail if they're caught singing K-pop songs. And this is from a regime where, just a few years ago, Kim and his wife hosted a K-pop concert. So it's interesting. So there's clearly a point where Kim was, I think, looking at and interested in, kind of opening to the West and dealing with Trump and all this stuff. He's made a U-turn. And these days, very firmly against it, trying to close off the country. Basically, you're a traitor if you listen to South Korean stuff. So, no, I mean, they're clearly very nervous about it. So, I mean, and I think, you send the troops. I mean, Russia has a relatively open internet. In contrast, it's not like China. I mean, China has a great firewall. You have to have the VPN to try to get through. North Korea has some restrictions, but North Korea is not nearly as restrictive as South Korea or China. So you can imagine some of these North Koreans might very well be seeing all sorts of stuff. I mean, they could put in Kim Jong Un into Google, and who knows what they're going to churn up. So, yeah, I mean, all these things are very dangerous for North Korea. I mean, if you assume you can stay in power only if you keep your population isolated, well, that's a game you might lose.
Well, especially if your soldiers, suddenly come back and they decide to revolt, and if you get enough of them, and it's but that might be one benefit of the Russian war. It's seeing what happened in North Korea. And, I mean, I hear things like North Koreans are on average shorter. They're just It's really unfortunate.
I mean, less nutrition. Oh yeah, no, they've suffered. Oh yeah.
We talk about the internet, but the one thing they really can't, they really can't jam. They really, you can't really stop the radio, although it's old technology. You put, I suppose I could set up a radio station 10 miles from the border and broadcast to North Korea, and what would they do?
Well, I mean, they have preset radio channels. At least when I visited, they had them. Now you can fuck with a radio. You might be able to get the stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the North Koreans, the regime tries to clamp down. I mean, one thing they did was, for VCRs, is they would go to an apartment complex, shut off the power, and then go apartment to apartment and see, because if you shut off the power, then it's locked into the machine. You can't pull it out. Now it's different with flash drives. I mean, you can power out, you can pull the flash drive out and hide it. But when you had VCRs, it'd be if they find your VCR and you have something from the South, then you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is it's just hard for the regime to try to keep all information out, and it strikes me that's one area where the U.S., South Korea, and others should do the best they can to try to get information in.
Yes, I can imagine. So where do you think South Korea will be in 10 years? It may not be long, before North Korea has the same population they do.
Well, it's going to take longer than that. I think that South Korea is going to remain much wealthier.
Yeah,
I think their democracy will survive. I mean, despite the current mess. I mean, my betting is that that you're going to have a constitutional court decision that will probably uphold the impeachment. Like, if you're a justice, you want to tell the public in South Korea they're stuck with this guy, and it's going to be a crippled government and everything. I think that you want to clear the way I look at it, it's kind of like somebody's crash landed on the carrier and their plane is on fire. You push it overboard. I mean, the presidency of Yoon is ruined. You want to get rid of it. My guess is that they'll be done with him in a month or so, and then they'll hold an election in a couple months. Very likely the progressives will take the presidency, and then everything will focus on 2027 when they have the next full term election. They're going to muddle through that. I think if North doesn't want a war, it knows it would lose. The question is, over time, can you break through in the North? Well, is there some point the North decides that far better give up this stuff, kind of join the West, can they get a regime that thinks it can survive that? And that's probably the big issue.
Yeah, and whether or not, they can get things back together. I mean, I'm certainly assuming, that there are still probably families that are separated by all this, and although they might at this point be grandchildren,
I mean,
cousins or second
most
cousins.
of the immediate families have died. There's still some, but we're talking about people in their 80s and 90s who are separated in the war. So that generation really is dying off. So then you don't have a direct relationship. So you may know that your grandparents had that, but it doesn't mean anything to you because you were never up north. You never knew anybody up north.
Did you think, there's been talk that Trump might actually bring this to a peace settlement? Do you think that might happen or not?
Well, I mean, I think his focus is trying to get peace in Ukraine.
Yeah.
After the active combat is going on. Look, he recently had a press conference and he talked about he's one of the few, he's like the only person who gets along really good with the guy in the North, Kim.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably overstating it a little bit. I don't know if he's ever imagined he's going to bring peace to North and South Korea. He certainly would like to do a deal. I mean, he famously they put together a video showing kind of what might happen with an open economy and wealth pouring into the North. So he's tried to sell that vision to the North. I don't know to what extent he actually imagines that might happen. I mean, the challenge with that, of course, is that people who hold political power today, are very likely to find themselves out of power if they open up. So it's just, what's your incentive? I mean, how many of those people care about the people versus how many want to hold power? My bet would be most of them want to hold power.
Yeah. If the men of South Korea and the men of the West don't feel like they have a chance to get married and have a family, what do they do? I mean, could something really radical come out of this? Like, do South Korean men like Andrew Tate, for example? It's
Look, I think the problem in South, it's not clear to me that men want more kids than women want there. I mean, I'm not sure that this is simply, it's all the problem of the women. I think, look, what's critical is you don't have a balance in terms of men and women. This is China's problem. China has too many men because the one-child policy for years. I mean, if you're a rural family, you want a boy because he's better farm labor. You get a baby girl, you let her die, or you get an abortion. As opposed to, so that is a real problem because there you have men who can't even get married. South Korea doesn't have that kind of an imbalance now. So I don't know if that's an issue of kids there. I think the Chinese problem is a bigger one. I mean, so you find Chinese trying to marry Vietnamese and others. I mean, the question is, because if you have young men who can't get married, then you actually have a larger population, what do you do with them and how do they behave? And they're not socialized in quite the same way. I think that is an issue for China that hopefully won't have with South Korea.
Yeah, I think we've covered Korea enough. What do you think will happen, with Israel and Russia right now? I mean,
well, Russia's tried to maintain a relatively positive relationship with Israel. I mean, Russia has been careful in what it's done. It's certainly working with Iran, and that doesn't make Israel happy. But I think, again, there's that element that both Israel and Russia have tried to prevent this from going way out of whack. That they kind of recognize, I mean, Russia has what it views as existential interests, in Europe and in terms of Ukraine and how that affects other stuff. But, Russia's never provided all of the highest anti-aircraft, kind of missile systems to Iran. I think Iran had the previous generation, not the best, the current ones. Same thing with Syria. And Syria always basically didn't use its anti-aircraft against the Israelis when they were bombing Iranian targets. I mean, so there's a very complex thing going on where people are kind of at odds, but they try to limit how far it goes. And I think both Russia and Israel have done that. Israel has not gone out of its way to criticize Russia in terms of the Ukraine war. Russia has always had limits in terms of what it would do with Iran and whatnot. I think there's still that sense that they don't want to completely blow it up because both sides lose if they do. The Russians don't want to bring Israel in supporting the Ukrainians. Israel doesn't want to have Russia view it has nothing to lose in terms of whether it be Palestinians or Syria or whoever.
Well, I just wish we'd get our nose out of all this stuff and let them fight it out.
So do I. Oh, yeah, especially the Middle East. Oh, my goodness.
I mean, the Middle East is just a quagmire that I don't think is ever going to be peaceful, but it seems like, it's...
and it's not vital for us. I mean, we have energy elsewhere. Israel can defend itself, etc.
Yeah, Israel can't, Ukraine. Well, I think we've covered just about everything here. I don't know. Oh, I did ask you I wanted to ask you too. What do you think? We've now had a year of melee. I don't know if you've been watching that much, but it's pretty amazing.
The economy is now growing. They've ended the recession.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, trying to save Argentina isn't easy. This is a country that's had kind of 70 years of bad government. Yeah. Coming out of World War II, it was one of the richest countries on earth, and today, of course, a disaster. No, the fact that they've broken out of the recession, this is a major step for me, Lee. Uh, I mean, obviously he doesn't do everything right, but he's really tried to. I mean, I know people who kind of know people in his administration who talk about how the deregulation is very serious. They made a
Yeah.
real effort to open up opportunities for entrepreneurship. The fact the economy is now broken out of the recession suggests that that's working. It's still a long way to go. I mean, you can't say victory now. Wonderful, he's done it. But this at least says after a year that Argentinians can say there's hope that if they get a growing economy, this could really be kind of a spectacular success.
It's become an obsession of mine, largely because I think he's really impacting the culture and changing people's minds about things. It could be, impactful for everybody. Well, I loved having you on, and I think that covers just about everything we wanted to cover today. I did want to get insight on South Korea. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, listen,
I should
everyone,
probably go to Korea. I should probably make a trip to Korea and Japan sometime. Maybe take about 2 weeks and give one
yeah,
week for each.
they're both worth seeing. I
Yeah,
mean, Japan has, I mean, in terms of kind of tourism and culture, I mean, there's probably more in Japan. You want to go to
yeah,
Kyoto, I mean, there's et cetera. But South Korea is definitely worth seeing, worth talking to people there.
yeah.
It's been an extraordinary success. This is a
You know,
country.
I also
1953 was war devastated, ruined, and today is one of the richest countries on earth.
and I have this vision, that these are two street. I walk down the streets are going to be really clean. There's not going to be a lot of homeless people on the streets. It's going to be orderly. I mean, these are societies that just, maybe they're not perfect, but it just feels like everything works.
I mean, look, they have their problems, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I would say probably urban life there is probably
Yeah.
better. Though of course, look, these are crazy, kind of crowded cities. Traffic and
Oh
so
yeah.
awful. I mean, the subways in Tokyo, they really have people to kind of push you in. I mean, it's so cramped.
I've seen,
So,
yeah,
I mean, it's important to realize that every place has its problems, but I do think that the tragedy in America is that our urban areas tend to be failures. I think countries like South Korea and
yeah.
Japan do much better and have success with the urban areas.
Yeah, I've seen videos of that in Tokyo. There are literally people who
Yeah.
close the subway
Yeah.
doors and kind of push people in. They're like packed
Yeah.
in like a can of
Yeah.
sardines. It's
Exactly. Yeah.
but I bet they always run on time, and there's probably not very much graffiti. I mean,
Yeah, I think so.
uh, you know, Japan and Korea probably don't want to admit it, but they have a lot more in common than they would like to admit.
Absolutely. Oh yeah,
They
no,
really,
they don't
even
want
though they
You're
don't
right.
really like each other.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so it's definitely worth just and
That's
certainly
right.
they've hopefully things will continue to progress. Although, one difference maybe is but it's certainly would be worth visiting. I probably and kimchi and food and just learning all about these countries.
I do without kimchi. It's not my favorite, but I like Korean barbecue and whatever.
Yeah, Korean barbecue in Japan, you got to have fish, just make sure it's fish and not the dolphins. What they do to the dolphins in Japan is just plain evil. But anyway, but yeah, there's a lot to be said for both societies. I can imagine, just watching really clean cities where people like to be in the city. But yeah, so okay, well, please, and you've got 10 books out there. You got a page on Amazon. You've written books, you've co-authored lots of good books, and I'll put an Amazon link in the description. And
Right.
yeah, no, I don't know. You've been at this for a long time. Yeah, you must love it because you keep at it. Because
Yeah, well, I'm trying to kind of work a little less and try to do a little more leisure travel. And just went to Spain recently, my first trip there. So pure tourism as opposed to any politics. So that was fun.
how many countries have you been to?
I've never really added up, but I mean, quite a few. Virtually all of Europe, much of Asia, North America, obviously. Kind of a more smattering in terms of Africa, South America.
Well, that's got to be a great life if you get some pictures and keep all that together. I can imagine
Well,
what you
look, it is fascinating. I mean, I'm looking at. I mean, I went to Syria in 2018, and I've been to all the places that I went to Aleppo. I went to Homs and Hama. I was at the Hafez Assad memorial, which they desecrated. I mean, if you see the pictures in Damascus of the traffic circle, it seemed to show up most of the. I went around that traffic circle multiple times, going from my hotel to government ministries. So I mean, it's fascinating. I look at that and say, "Wow, I was there." It's kind of neat.
Yeah, this seems to be my favorite question. What airports do you love and what airports do you hate?
Oh, geez. I mean, I hate JFK. I mean, I guess Dulles is okay, which is what I use. Constantly. I hate the people mover stuff. It's kind of crappy. I mean, if you think internationally, I don't like Heathrow. I like Munich. Munich is much better than Frankfurt, which is larger and a real pain.
Munich is nice, yeah.
Yeah, but Munich, I think, is a lot nicer. So Berlin was much smaller, more kind of reasonable size.
Yeah.
Beijing, it's a huge airport, but it's well done. I mean, it's it's a sophisticated one, which I've gotten to know it, so I don't mind it. Frankly, I kind of know what it is. Seoul, kind of the same. I mean, now Singapore airport is very nice. I'd say I put Singapore in kind of one of the top categories there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just that always says a lot. It just there's a lot of variety in airports. But yeah. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, check out my Substack, go to Buy Me a Coffee to support the show. Thank you, Doug Bandow. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel Escape from the Village from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.